Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Masters Swimming Podcast, and the first to be published as both an audio and video file. So if you're watching us on YouTube, then thank you for doing so, and I hope it adds a little bit extra to your experience. But if you're listening to us as an audio podcast, then welcome back, and normal service resumes for you guys. You can now also follow the Masters Swimming Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, and the podcast community on Facebook does still exist. So I'm Joe Malone, and I'm joined this week by Beth Hogg and John Wood for his podcast debut. So welcome, John, and how are you doing?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm great this morning, thank you. Steady along, start the new week.
Good. For full transparency, this is our second go at recording this. We tried it last night and it didn't go very well, did it? So better luck this time, I hope. Look, it's great to see you as ever as well, Beth. How did it go at Inter-Counties last week?
Yeah, it was good. It was very for me personally, I had very consistent swims, pretty much within like a couple of tenths of each other, considering I had like 4 of them in about an hour. So yeah, it's just like a normal sprint night, really. But it went really well. We came second as Cheshire, behind Yorkshire. So seeing Jonathan and Jamie, they made that very apparent that they'd won. So yeah, it was quite funny, but it was always really good to catch up with them and everyone else. And I got to see my mum, which was also very nice. She's sort of it was good.
That sounds like a lovely weekend. And you said you did you had consistent swims. You swam 3 swims in the space of an hour. What were those?
So I swam 4 and I swam 3 50 backstrokes. So I swam an individual and then relays, and then I swam a 50 free in the relay. Funnily enough, I actually didn't think that the relay was 4x50 free because we were in our medley order. So I was like ready to jump in the pool and people got on the blocks. And I was like, what's going on? And so that was quite funny. And then everyone was like, it's freestyle. And I was like, okay. So that was good preparation. Yeah.
Good you found out before you jumped in the water.
Yeah. So people got on the block. So people were getting on the blocks and I was like, oh, okay. They kind of like took the initiative, but it would have been funny had I just got in. I don't know.
Strictly speaking, you'd have been allowed to.
Yeah, it's very true. I actually had a similar experience to you at Nationals, Beth, because I swam 4 relays, but 3 of them were, I was doing 50 freestyle. So some of them were 4x50 free and some were medley, but I had the last leg on every one. Yeah. So I never actually knew which one it was because it didn't really matter to me. And I thought, well, if I see everybody jumping in the water to start with, I know it's a medley. But if I get to even get on the block, I know it's freestyle.
Yeah, I can't get away with that because I'm a backstroker. But then, Vicky's exactly the same. She's like the anchor leg freestyle for every single relay. She never swims anything else. It's like, it's dead easy for her, but it's not for me.
Oh, well, you didn't make any mistakes, so that's good. So John, you swim for Bristol Henleys, and you're also a triathlon coach. Is that a full-time job?
Yeah, so I've been running my own business for the last 9 years. I've been qualified as a tri coach since 2010. And yeah, my day-to-day, I'm either teaching people to swim at various different levels, from complete learn to swim all the way up to some quite decent swimmers. I do a bit of run coaching, so I work with a local physio, dealing with people who've had injuries. So it might be particular technical issues and stuff like that, or I'm writing training plans for people doing marathons, long swims, triathlons, etc.
Sounds great. And you are very much an active master swimmer as well, isn't it? You did the Europeans in the summer, and then you've also got Welsh Masters coming up.
Correct. Yeah. Rome was a great experience. I did career 3 years before, and they were both really cool experiences for different reasons. And I did London and Slovenia as well from the European side of things. So.
Oh, that's brilliant. So, I mean, I feel like I'm the only one that missed out on the Europeans this year. It feels like everybody who's been on this podcast went to it. It sounds like a really good one. Well, I want to discuss training blocks. So when I think of training blocks, it can be, you can think of it in many contexts. So I was actually thinking from a coach's perspective, actually, John, as a swim coach, you plan for sessions all year round, regardless of whether you're there, because of course there will always be swimmers at training. Yeah. So I guess you would write training blocks that maybe are based around competitions, and then in a different context on a personal level, you might consider a training block that's 10 weeks, and then you might think I'll have a few weeks off. So again, it's all different variations and it's all very personal. I've never actually really done a training block before in swimming. I've always just swam a couple of times a week, all the way through and never really considered any changes. But prior to the nationals, I did a sort of a 14-week block, and it's the first time I've ever thought about it as a training block. And I wrote it all down, and then I wrote my results down from my times at the nationals, and it was I just really loved it, and it really focused the mind. But it's interesting because when I train in the gym, I always train in blocks, and I always consider the structure of my sessions. And the same that, I did a half marathon a few years ago, and again, it's like 10 weeks leading up to it. I guess, John, for you as a triathlon coach, you must always work in blocks. That must just be totally normal to you.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's a couple of really interesting points that you brought out in that. One is writing things down. I was very lucky when I was an age group swimmer from about the age of 12. My coach had us or encouraged us to write our sessions down, to log your training, because it's an easy way of looking back and seeing why things are going well or why things are going badly, or when things have gone well, what have you done so you can try and replicate that. I mean, unfortunately, I had a bit of a recurring kind of chronic illness through my early teens, and so actually the reason for keeping the log was to try and monitor things to see how I felt and whether there were things that were cropping up regularly as to when I was then feeling unwell. But I think it's really important actually to log your training. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to log the whole sessions. So I'll come out of a swim session with Henleys, and I don't coach those sessions; they're written for us. But I will write down the whole session because that's the way my brain works. But if you're doing a session and you know that you're doing a technical session, or you're doing a bit more of a threshold session where you're working, and you know roughly what your splits were, it's good to note them down. So if you do, I don't know, 10 lots of 100 at, I don't know, 800 pace, and you're able to note down roughly what those times are, then you can then come back to that session 2, 3, 4 weeks later, or 6 weeks later in the next block, and you've got that to refer back to. So I think a lot of people don't log their training. More and more people are wearing watches and stuff. I don't actually like wearing a watch while swimming, although I do it now because clients use them. And so it's really interesting to see what comes out from the watch and then what I'm seeing as a coach. But yeah, a lot of people don't log anything, whether you write it down in a diary. And I've got all these page to view A4 diaries from my teenage years at my parents' house. But stuff, even writing it down, Excel spreadsheet, it's a really good way of just referring back to things day to day, week to week, month to month. From the point of view of a whole training block, you could have various different types. And you said about you doing the running side of things. One of the ways you want to split up your training is to make sure you always have a regular recovery or deload week or period within your training, because you can't keep progressing all the time, both either in terms of results or in terms of your effort. So you want to load things gradually. So you want progressive overload. That's what it's known as for those who aren't necessarily in the know. And then you need a time to recover and adapt. And it's in that adaptation that your body actually improves, that you actually get stronger. So you said about doing gym work. That's a really good example, because you can't keep putting more and more weight on the bar or lifting bigger and bigger dumbbells or kettlebells or whatever. You need that time to recover. So it's something that I always try and impress on people, whether I'm writing plans for them or whether I just talk to them poolside when I'm doing technical stuff, is that you recover and you adapt at the same time. You need stress to break down your body and push your body harder, and then you need that recovery to actually grow and improve and get stronger. So those recovery periods are really important. And I was listening to the podcast a couple of weeks ago with Jamie and I can't remember who else was on with you.
With Jonathan.
With Jonathan, that's right. And you were talking about whether you were having a break off after nationals, and that sort of a break is really important as well, because you need a mental break as much as a physical break. If you've trained, like you said, 12, 14 weeks solid up to the end of October, your brain's going to be fried. For me, I didn't do anything really for 2 or 3 weeks after Rome, because I raced at British Champs back in April, and then pushed from there up to Rome. And that's kind of 3-4 months, and then for us as, let's say, real people with jobs, families, and then trying to put training on top, it's a real big load mentally as much as physically, where you need to take that time to stop afterwards. So I think the rest blocks or recovery blocks or adaptation blocks are as important as a part of your training as the technical blocks and the build things, where you're building more and more volume into your training, or you're putting more and more speed work, where actually obviously the speed and the intervals might go up, but also the rest intervals might increase as well. The traditional block for now for most age group swimmers, and I suppose possibly for master swimmers, having done Masters Nationals a couple of weeks ago, is to have a bit of a build now through Christmas into January, where you start putting in a bit of volume. And I think a lot of the suggested wisdom from the 70s, 80s, 90s, early thousands now is changing away from that and putting in a bit more technical focus. So where I'm swimming at Bristol Henleys, our coach Jez has got us doing a hell of a lot of technical stuff, because if you've got good habits, it's a lot easier to build the volume and the fitness and the speed, because you've already got good habits there. Whereas it's a lot harder to correct things when you've been swimming, like drilling it in hard for, I don't know, 2-3 months. And then you go, right, okay, so I need to focus on my body position, or I need to work on what my hands are doing in the water, or whatever it is, your technical skills. So you've got your technical blocks, and you've got build blocks, and you've got, speed stuff, and you can mix up however you like. But as long as you know what your focus is, that's the really important bit. Sorry, that probably felt a little bit long-winded, but I guess there's all sorts of different bits to consider when you are thinking about those training blocks.
No, absolutely, and that's exactly what we're talking about. It's almost as if you're a coach, John. You seem to know what you're talking about there.
Sometimes.
Beth, I know that Bob Bolton does not believe in taper. It sounds like he only believes in hard work. So post nationals, what have you guys been doing?
No, we actually did taper. So so the week before we did low volume, kind of low intensity, and then the week after we did very low volume, low intensity, and now we're starting to do technique. So we're doing like a bit of volume with technical focus. So we're doing a lot more kind of preset stuff, so stuff with like paddles and more underwater kicking and drills. We've done a lot of body position kick, which is gross, especially when it's on your front and you're like, this is a great like first video podcast, but when you're like this and you have to breathe like that, instead of like that, it's just
tough. Do you do any snorkel work, Beth?
Yeah, I do. I used to, when I was an age group swimmer, I used to be able to turn with the snorkel on, do tumble turn. I just can't do it anymore. I just like drown at 5 meters out of the wall. We get encouraged to bring snorkels now until basically up until January. They're like, we're going to use them, like basically if you want to get it out, to focus on like technique and stuff. But also like I think it's good for doing body position kick with breathing, because it still like focuses to maintain the body position while you breathe, which is also quite hard. And I like didn't even know that. I don't know if this is like very common knowledge, but I like learned to like push my core up when I'm swimming free and like chest a bit downwards when I'm swimming free, and that's how you're supposed to swim.
Keep your hips high.
To keep your hips high. So you swim it like that, and I've been swimming like this, which is just an uphill battle, really.
Funny stuff. Sorry.
Oh, pardon. What did I?
No, Joe first.
Oh, well, I was just going to move it on, actually, John. So you jump in.
So I was going to make a comment that actually, for me, whether coaching or training, I use a snorkel for body position a lot. If somebody hasn't got a snorkel, I get people to do swimming with minimal breathing. So where I coach the 20-yard pool. So even for relatively newer swimmers, most people can get down the pool in maximum of 1 breath or maybe 2 at a push. But keeping your head still is a really good way, because even if you look at the elites and the Olympians, and I've never really considered this. I went and did a course with the guy who ran what used to be Swim Smooth, is now Swimming Common, Paul Newsome. And he was showing us some video of some of the Olympians, I can't remember who, but just how even at that high level, when they're breathing, their stroke changes and alters. And it's something that I know anyway, as a coach and a little bit as a swimmer, but it's really interesting to see it at that high level slowed down. So what you're trying to do is exactly that, is keeping your head as still as possible, whether you do it with a snorkel or whether you do it by no breathing. And a quick funny story, when I was an age grouper, we had snorkels and our coach got little caps for the top of them to limit the air going in, to just to make the breathing a little bit more difficult, so you don't just get used to breathing free and easy. But one of the girls that I was training with was a little bit gullible and didn't really understand. Didn't Was a bit suggestible, shall we say? And he said it was just to stop water going in the other way. Just to go with Beth talking about nearly drowning by 5 meters with a snorkel. So that just reminded me. Thought it was quite amusing.
That sounds like absolute torture, to be honest. But Beth, I wonder with you know, in the context of all these training blocks, and you say you're now working more on technical stuff. Does Bob ever lay out to your squad, this is what we're going to work on for 10 weeks or 12 weeks, or do you kind of take it week by week?
Yeah, it's more like week by week, session by session. I think because with masters, you never know what's going to happen to, like, someone could become ill or someone could have like a reason why they're not in the water as much. So it's kind of suitable for like everyone. So people who are really consistent and then like less consistent as well. But yeah, like he usually takes it, like every time we do a main set, he's like, this is what we're working on. This is what you should try to do. And then like he takes questions and then sometimes kind of pulls you out the pool for like pointers and stuff. But I think he kind of mentions what we're doing. So I think everyone knows that like from nationals up to Christmas, it's a bit more technical and a bit easier with a bit of volume. And then it's like, we know that from like summer to nationals, it's really high intensity stuff, like really hard. But then even our speed work changes as well. So at the minute, it's now kind of like keeping us like ticking over with like good speed. Rather than like doing like dive practice or takeover practice and stuff like that, and like trying to work on that. So yeah, like underwater kicking and working the breakouts and stuff like that is really important now. So yeah. It doesn't go through like the whole block, but yeah, it's more like a week on week thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I also think it depends what type of club you are, because when I think about my club, RTW Masters, we don't necessarily compete en masse. So we've got, I don't know, around 50 swimmers. But you will never really get 50 in any one session. You know, it's probably more like 30 in a session. Yeah. And I mean, at nationals, I think we had eight of us compete. So that's quite a small percentage, really. So I think for our coach, Andy, he can try all he wants to sort of write a 10-week block that leads up to a competition. But how many of those swimmers are actually competing is probably quite small. So what Andy tends to do, and what he's done on this occasion, is he said, okay, we're going to work on volume up to sort of Christmas, but he's not really laid out what that looks like. He's just kind of given us an inclination about this is what to sort of expect, which I think is quite an interesting approach really for the type of club that we are. But one thing that really dawned on me, John, was after having watched the Olympics last year, obviously we'd just gone through, you know, well, every country went through their own version of a lockdown or various lockdowns. And I know that a lot of athletes didn't really get the opportunity to train in the way that they normally would. Some of them were using those kind of endless pools, but you're not really able to do proper quality sessions in those. So it's interesting that we still saw swimmers turn up and break world records. And so that really makes me think, well, that's where training blocks can be really good, because you may only get X number of weeks, but it's about being primed for the day or for the competition. I guess you'd agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it highlights probably something that was shown a lot from the late 90s and 2000s with people like Mark Foster, that you don't necessarily need to be spending so many hours in the water all the time. And again, you know, you look at some of like yourself and Beth and Jamie and Jonathan talking the other week. None of us are swimming. Well, I say none of us. Very few of us are swimming as often as we were as age groupers. At 18, I was still a 200 fly, 1500 freestyle swimmer, swimming 10 sessions a week, 21-ish hours. And now I'm swimming 3-ish hours a week, maybe 2 to 3 on average. I do 2 to 3 hours in the gym, and then I run where I can as well. But in Korea before COVID, I swam a lifetime best over 100 fly. And in Italy, just gone, I was within 2/100ths of my lifetime best over 50 fly.
Wow.
So it shows how the more you know your body, the more informed you can be with your training. And as you say, rest and recovery, they are as important as trying to smash in as many yards as you can.
Yeah, and something that again is personal to everybody is the length of time that a person needs to build up to a competition, the level of intensity that you put in, all that kind of stuff. Beth, I don't know how well you kind of know your body when it comes to swimming, but what would you say would be if you had a competition? How many, and let's say you were designing your own program, how many weeks out would you think this is where I need to start? This is how many weeks of intense, then I drop it off. Have you got a kind of a model in your head that you think would work for you?
Not.
No.
I haven't really thought about it.
No.
I should probably know from being an age group swimmer and from also doing an assistant coaching course. But I think I would say probably like 12 weeks in like 2 blocks. Maybe do 6 easy a week and then like 5 and an easy.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't really know.
No, but that's fine though, because I mean, one thing that I'm going to try and focus on next year is, try and do lots of competitions and actually write down how I felt. So at the end of the competition, I'm not just going to write down my results. I'm going to write down how I felt when I raced and even just in the warm up and stuff like that, and try and spot a trend, because then I guess that's all part of the learning of what type of training is best for me and intensity levels and stuff. Because I actually dropped off my intensity quite a lot 2 weeks out from nationals. That actually wasn't intentional because we have full-time jobs, we have lives outside the water, and a few things kind of just like cropped up and meant I couldn't get as much swimming in. And I sort of went into nationals thinking, oh God, I've not done what I planned to do. And it's, right at the kind of cusp end of it as well. But then I swam, I was really pleased with how I swam. So then it's kind of made me think, well, maybe that was a good thing then. Maybe it was great that I didn't slog myself at the very end.
Yeah. Good. Sorry, Beth.
That's really interesting. Because when I first came back to swimming like last May, I swam really well at nationals on like 3 sessions a week-ish with like a lot of gym work. And then I kind of picked up the swimming and the gym, and I've had, I would say, considering the amount of more training I've done, I've had a much worse season this year. And so it's kind of like, I haven't really felt amazing like I did last year or like at the very start of this year. So it's kind of like going back to the drawing board almost. And it was kind of like, I was swimming the same times at nationals this year, a little bit quicker, a little bit slower. But I trained so much more. So it's kind of like I'm trying to figure out what the best combination of sessions is, because at the minute I'm a bit stuck, and I think I'm just still, because I've just got back into it as well. Like I'm still learning of what is good for me. I'm very bad at resting.
Like not alone in that. You're really not alone.
Yeah. I know. So I always want to be doing stuff, and I like working hard. Like I really thrive on working really, really hard and swimming like really, really hard. And I do what Bob says, and it is working. I'm a lot fitter. But it's just I don't know what to do to develop my speed at the minute. So
yeah. So on that basis then, John, would you say that a lot of it is not, so it almost comes in 2 parts, doesn't it? Because it's actually physically what is best for your body, but it's also what mentally you prefer to do. So Beth said she just loves training hard, and that makes you feel like you're doing loads of work. So and even if that's not necessarily the best approach for your body, if it makes you feel good going into race, would you advocate for that?
Yeah, I think there's actually three sides to it. So one is what it feels like, and learning to overcome that kind of ego thing. And I don't mean that about you specifically, Beth. We've all got it, and it's something that drives us all. And sometimes you have to remember that what your ego is telling you is it's almost a survival mechanism, or it's a coping mechanism, and actually trying to just recognize where that's coming from and just go, it's okay not to do that, that you don't need to do that. There is obviously the physiological side of things as well, and how that works, and knowing what's right for you. And then there's consistency as well. Consistency is a really important part, because I get people asking me, okay, so I want to do more sessions. Well, yeah, that's great, but are you doing the sessions that you have planned, whether I'm writing them or you're going to your club and doing them? Are you doing the 3-4 sessions a week regularly? Because if you're not, then what's the point in trying to add more in? Or if you're not coping with that, if you're getting to the end of the week and you are absolutely blowing out your backside and you're needing more sleep and more food, what's the point in putting extra sessions in? So there is a lot to take into that. And you were saying about recording how you feel after each event and stuff. It takes probably, depending on who you talk to and depending on what you're changing, it's going to take between 2 and 4 months to really feel a change in your training strategy. I can't remember whether it was your podcast last week, Joe, or whether this podcast, or whether it was something I heard Sonny talking about elsewhere, that he was talking about, 6 months is where you want to get to with an athlete, where you start. Yeah. I think it was this podcast last week, where he was, you need 6 months, where he was talking about Chad starting to actually improve because he'd actually implemented all the things he wanted. So it's allowing time, and it's being able to reflect on things, not critically. Well, it is critically, but a little bit dispassionately, and being able to go, okay, so how did I feel? What went well? If you go, like for me next week, racing at Welsh Masters, what went well? What was really good? So I might have swum a couple of really good times. But also, what could I change? What could I work on? So, going into it, I haven't done a huge amount of volume. So I'm not sure whether I'm going to do the 400 free or not yet. So I might go into it, and the 400 free might be a reasonable time considering the fact that I've not done a huge amount of volume. And so that might be a positive, but going forward, and this is something I have to battle with Jez a little bit, because he is very much quality over quantity. Most of the swimmers in the club are sprinters. So for me to get endurance sets in there, there's maybe one other person joining me doing them, but I have to push for those. So it might be a case of saying through December and January, actually, I want to be doing a bit more endurance work. That's my progression. That's my work take forward from that. And I think it's being able to make little tweaks, having made your overall plan, again, like with your blocks and your training segments that you've got, and not just going, oh, it was a crap swim.
Yeah.
It's not just a blunt, that was crap. It's not trying to be, I'm going to say, not toxically positive, because we either go, oh, it was shit, or it was, excuse my language, it was awful, or it was great, by having a good time. But actually, you can go, yeah, it was all right. This is what I could do better, and this was just me on the day. There's a lot of illness going around. I felt a bit rubbish, etc., etc.
Yeah, that's interesting. The illness thing is interesting, is it? Because there are things that you can't plan for, and I mentioned earlier the whole couple of weeks out from nationals. Work things cropped up that I wasn't expecting, so I couldn't swim quite as much. In our club, again, we have one coach, so that he has a lot to have to think about when there's that many swimmers. So he writes one session that we all do, and some of the kind of lower lanes just might not do as much. So if we're doing 15 100s, they might do 12, for example, but we all still work to the same program. Beth, at Trafford Metro, being such a big club, there being so many swimmers, you've got people like yourselves and James who are sprint swimmers, and then you'll have other people who enjoy doing the 200s and the 400s when it comes to racing. Does Bob write 2 separate sessions, or does he ever do certain drills where he might say, okay, distance guys go in that lane and sprinters go in that lane?
I think I'm learning that I'm maybe a 200 swimmer. It's very quiet, but yeah, my best swims at nationals were 200s, and
interesting.
We're thinking about maybe working towards that as like an easy win, but I want to become quicker. So I don't know whether I'm just doing all of the right stuff for 200s and all of the wrong stuff for like 50s and 100s, and just like, where is it going to go? Anyway, yes. Long and short answer is yes. So on sprint nights, we have 2 sets. So there's a sprint set and a middle distance set. On some mornings, there's a long distance set. So on weekend sessions, so Saturday morning, Sunday, there's usually a longer set, a middle set, and a sprint set. So Bob and Joe are our coaches for masters, and Joe takes the mornings and Bob takes the evenings. So, and every session is different. So you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do depending on like the type of set that happens on each specific day. So like Monday, Tuesday nights usually like quite high intensity, pace work and stuff like that. And then I think I don't really know what Monday and Wednesday mornings are like because I've never been to one. Thursday and Sunday are like middle distance, quite like aerobic work or sprints. Saturday morning is like high intensity aerobic work as well, and sometimes some strength as well. So a lot of paddle work and stuff like that. So yeah, it's always changing, and there is different sets. And if you wanted, there is a couple of distance swimmers and open water swimmers and people that really thrive with the distance. I can't really relate to that myself, but yeah. They usually do a longer kind of slower session, so like longer meterage, but as in like longer intervals, so 400s instead of like hundreds, but it's a bit slower as well because they're kind of much more kind of slower but more consistent, unlike us who is just like splash and dash all the time. Yeah, so you can do basically whatever your event you want to train for, you can train for
you can work on it. That's really good. Yeah. And John, when you're coaching people, obviously whether this is in the water or on the road or on a bike, how much do you believe in repetition over the course of a block? So let's just obviously talk in the pool for now. Do you like the idea of, although your sessions would be different, there are certain things, so 1550s on a minute turnaround once a week, twice a week, to build up to that repetition part? How much do you believe in that?
I think repetition is really important, and I think from a skill point of view, as much as anything else, water's 750 times more dense than air. So when you're looking, if I'm coaching triathletes, that's why the technical element becomes so much more important, and it's why so many triathletes either dislike the swim or struggle with it, because you can't just do more swimming and get better, whereas you can with running and cycling to a certain extent, not necessarily all of it. Sometimes I think repetition in terms of set depends on the number of sessions that somebody's got. If somebody's doing 2, maybe 3 sessions at a push during a week, over a month, there's probably not going to be a huge amount of repetition, maybe in the warm-ups a little bit just to get you started. But if somebody's swimming 4, 5, 6 times a week, whether they're a triathlete or a swimmer, there probably is a bit more scope for repeating the same sets, whether it's the same aerobic sets, because it can be longer and smoother and you can just use it as a gauge to how you're feeling, not necessarily because you're improving, but just your level of fatigue during the week or during the block. That can be quite a useful indicator for you, and I think that's what it is as much as anything else. It's a skill thing, and it's an indicator of where you're at physiologically.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. John mentioned earlier, Beth, about not wearing a watch, but some of his clients do, and I know we've talked about this before, haven't we, about sometimes you can get a bit obsessed with the data, so it's like put the watch away for a bit and just roll with it. And that's kind of made me think, training blocks are important. It's certainly important to a coach if you're trying to write sessions for people. But as an athlete yourself, what's your preference? Do you prefer visualizing your training block, or do you prefer just to completely roll with it year round?
I like both. I like data. I'm a scientist.
Yeah, very true, very true.
I like data, and I really like following it, and it makes it really easy to follow and figure out. And yeah, just for spotting patterns as well. So yeah, love the watch. But I usually go with sessions when it asks me, I don't really when I go back in a session, I don't really look at the times or anything like that, because I know it's a bit inaccurate with timing sometimes, especially if you just leave it to run and forget to like press the button for each interval, which I do. I just kind of leave it. I just kind of use the watch to like record like the very kind of basic things, so like meters, like heart rate, like maximum ish, and then like how did it feel, and how hard do you think it was, so like working in like RPE and just kind of how you felt about it. So I usually it usually tells me to give it a score out of like 1 to 10, hard to easy. And then how did you feel? Like, did you feel really rubbish or did you feel like really, really good? So I kind of use both. So I track data, but I track data on feel.
Yeah, that's good.
It's pseudoscience.
No, that sounds
I
interesting.
wouldn't go that far. And actually, studies show that how you feel, like RPE, is almost as accurate, if not more. Especially the more attuned you are to your body, RPE is more as accurate as having a heart rate monitor or power monitor, a power meter for your bike, etc.
Yeah, definitely. I could definitely feel that. I mean, like yesterday, I just got back into the gym. I had like a few weeks off of the gym just because I've been like working like crazy. And I just got back into the gym like this week, and the DOMS was very real. So a session that I usually like, a speed session that is usually like pacing and quite consistent, almost killed me, like had me retching yesterday. It was terrible. So I realized that's just because I think my muscles are like so tired and they're still like recovering. It's just like getting used to it. And it's like, oh, that was tough. Yeah.
That does sound tough. So John, I was thinking then, in terms of, if you are as a coach, if you're training a client all year round,
yeah,
would you work in that sort of bit of both way, in that you might say to your client, right, this is what the next 10 weeks looks like, and we're building up to something, a competition, and then after that competition, would you continue to train with your client but not really lay out any sort of plan and just almost give them that mental break for a bit?
yeah, absolutely. So using swimming as an example, you might say, okay, training up till October for Masters Nationals, or for Rome for the European Masters, you've got, let's say, 8 weeks, and we'll divide it into 4 week blocks. And then after the competition, whatever it is, I actually suggest taking a week to 2 weeks off, like the big one. The thing is, and this matters before, and it comes back to what you were saying about having a bit of a break, unintentional break before Masters, was you don't gain or lose fitness in 1 week. Same as, Beth was talking about feeling like you always want to be doing something, you always want to work hard. There's people worry about what they're eating, and nobody got fat from eating one donut or a piece of cake. And similarly, nobody lost weight from just having a salad. These things are cumulative. And we all need reminding them. And I needed this before Rome myself as well, because our club had less training, because it's an age group club. So over the summer, there were very reduced sessions. And my coach said to me, you're not going to get fitter or less fit through the 2.5 weeks of August before you go out to Italy. And it was a really good reminder for me. Yeah. So yeah, that week after, maybe 2 weeks after your big event, depending on how long you've worked up to it, my suggestion is try not to do anything for at least a week. Because 1, mental break, 2, physical break, but 3, you'll come back actually wanting to get back in the water. And if it has been a really long year, again, this I suppose probably deals more towards the triathletes than the swimmers, but I suggest going and doing something else as well. Through the winter, I mean, swimming is a year-round sport, really. But if I'm dealing with triathletes, unless they're doing duathlon through the winter or they're doing a bit of cross-country running, there's nothing to specifically train for. So go and do something else. Go and climb. I learned to row 10 years ago before I came back to master swimming. I learned to row because it was something that meant I didn't have to go and ride on the roads or sit on the turbo for hours on end. And it's a new skill. So you go, that's really exciting and really interesting. And actually, I was able to relate that to swimming as well, because there's a lot of the similar feel and muscle groups involved. But go and do something different. Go and run off road, or go and try mountain biking. Like I said, take your watch off. If you're someone who likes going and doing other outdoor sports, even as a swimmer, if you like going and doing outdoor sports, take the watch off and just go for a run. Go and explore. Be active so that you're maintaining a level of fitness, that base, but it's not training. It's going and having fun. And then it means that when you do come to that point where you go, right, I've got 16 weeks to my next competition, or 20 weeks, or whatever it is, you go, actually, I'm ready to get in the water. And you can start introducing more swimming as you go. But you can then come to when you want to work hard and go, actually, I'm refreshed, I'm ready to go and ready to hit it hard.
Really, really interesting point. And that was actually going to be the last thing I wanted to talk about, Beth, actually, was what, when it comes to that kind of off the block, as it were. So you've just finished your competition, no pun intended. Do you prefer to have a complete break, and let's just say a couple of weeks, as opposed to like long term? Do you prefer to have a complete break, or do you prefer to carry on, whether it's swimming or something else, but in that mindset of, I'm not recording it, I don't really care how hard I work, it's just about keeping it going?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now I'm just ticking over with swimming, and that's why I like started to get back into the gym, because I'd rather do some more gym work, and I was kind of solely focused on swimming, especially up till nationals, and I kind of want to go back and do some more like gymming and maybe just a bit more cycling, because I really like cycling, and like on the turbo as well. I like really, really love Zwift. It's just so much fun. So maybe like doing elements of cross training. I also really like climbing. So me and my boyfriend go to a climbing gym.
That's cool.
Which is really good and good fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I try and do like different things. I mean, at the minute I kind of trained all the way through just because I've still got competitions, but I think I'll use Christmas to have like a good 10 days, if not more, off and out of the water. And then it's always good, and it was always good at Christmas. Usually I've been on holiday with my parents in January, and we've gone to Club of Santa, which is like you can do like 80 sports. So
yeah,
always been a really good time of like having some downtime for a bit. So we'll see if they let me go on holiday with them, and then I'll do some different things.
No, that sounds really good. I've been speaking to Helen Gorman recently, and actually going to get her back on my podcast soon. Her training block has been insanely impressive. I mean, I'm not sure how she's kind of sectionalized it, but her goal for this year was to try and swim 1,000,000 meters in training, and she's on for it actually. And she tends to post on Instagram each week how many meters she's done.
Yes.
And just the other day she swam 8,500 meters in one session, and I just sort of read that post and thought, God, if I do that in a week, I'm really proud of myself. But the final thing, John, that I wanted to just touch on was that concept of being in the flow state. So I'm really fascinated by flow state, and I don't think I've ever achieved it for myself yet. And I guess this all comes down to knowing your body and mind really well, to know what the flow state looks like for you. Because I'm an all or nothing person. I will, again, excuse the pun, I'll dive straight in full on, or I just won't train at all. And so have you got any kind of tips for finding that just perfect state of flow?
It's a really difficult one because it will look and feel different for everybody. And because swimming is that much more technical, it requires that bit more brain power anyway, and it requires those that autonomous state, I guess, for want of a better term, to build those good habits so that actually you can move along without forcing it mentally as much as it is physically. But I think as much as you can, it's about being aware of yourself and aware of your body and aware of why and how you're doing things. So when you are pushing or wanting to push, know why you're doing it. As Beth was saying, she likes working hard, and I think most of us do. It feels good to work hard. It feels like you're doing something, but you've also got to remember that you don't have to be working hard to be making progress. I use the running example, especially because you said you've run a few half marathons. Running hard all the time is the quickest way to get injured. So it's learning, and obviously you don't have those pressures, you don't have those build-ups on your body so much in the water, but similarly, or on the same side, you won't make the same gains all the time because you're always pushing up against that rev limiter. So it's knowing why you're working hard, it's training with intention, and actually, I would say one of the best ways to get into it is to do as much easy, slow swimming, and the two terms should be interchangeable. They're not necessarily always the way, but to try and do as much easy and slow swimming as you can, so you know what it feels like when you are swimming easy and you are swimming slow, but you're swimming with the same technique as you would do when you start working harder, because then you know what it feels like to move effortlessly through the water. Because what should happen as you start to build up, I appreciate that sometimes with something like freestyle, you might turn to more of a straighter arm recovery. But most of your technique should stay roughly the same. It'll get a little bit shorter because you're moving your hands quicker. You're not trying to stretch out quite so far. But roughly speaking, your technique should be the same. That's why you will do all these technique hours in the pool, or you do all these technique sets. So the more slow stuff that you can do, where you're aware of what your body's doing, and when you are high in the water, to go back to what we were saying about with Beth, with her body position as she was swimming along, the more you're aware of that when you're swimming easy, the more, as you build the power and build the effort, you can keep that going. And the more you can be aware of that, the less you start forcing it.
Yeah, no, really interesting, and definitely food for thought in terms of the, as I say, that flow state for me, just trying to find out what works best for me, I suppose, because again, we talked earlier about what's the best training block for you, and that's different for everybody, and especially if you do swim for a club and you're ultimately under the control of the coach in terms of the session that they write, it might not suit you, but you just have to kind of go with it. We are going to do a podcast in the new year as well about goal setting, which I think will be quite an interesting one. So food for thought for you two guys as well. But thank you both for joining me. It was a really, really interesting chat. I really like that we all have different preferences. I think that's really interesting. Good luck at Welsh Masters. Is it next week, John? Is it next week?
Yeah, it's next weekend, Saturday 2nd or whatever it is at Newport.
Brilliant. Yeah. And any more competitions for you, Beth?
Etwell this weekend.
Oh, you're doing it?
Yeah, I'm doing it.
Amazing. Well, I'll see you there.
Yeah, and then I've got a non-masters age group competition in December.
That's
to
right.
get some
Yeah.
actual times, because they don't count in masters, which is rubbish.
No, they don't, as I found out before COVID.
Yeah. Annoying.
I found out I made my time from Korea in the 100 fly qualify me for the Olympic trials, and unfortunately it didn't qualify me for the Olympic trials because it's run under different rules.
That's such a shame. Oh, well, I'm glad we've all got something to still train for prior to Christmas, which is great. And once again, thank you very much, and chat to you soon.
Thank you for having us.